Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. Today we will be continuing to read The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So, let's get going. "That I do, lad," she answered. "I never knowed it by that name, but what does the name matter? I warrant they call it a different name in France, and a different one in Germany. Same thing as set the seeds swelling and the sun shining made the well lad, and it's the good thing. It isn't like us poor fools as think it matters if us is called out of our names. The big good thing doesn't stop to worrit. Bless thee. It goes on making worlds by million, worlds like us. Never thee stop believing in big good thing, and knowing the world's full of it, and call it what thou likes. There were singing to it when I come into garden." "I felt so joyful," said Colin, opening his beautiful strange eyes at her. "Suddenly I felt how different I was. How strong my arms and legs were, you know, and how I could dig and stand, and I jumped up and wanted to shout out something to anything that would listen. The magic listened when they sung doxology. It would have listened to anything they'd sung. It was the joy that mattered. Eh, lad, what's names to the joy maker?" And she gave his shoulders a quick soft pat again. She had packed a basket which held a regular feast this morning, and when the hungry hour came and Dickon brought it out from its hiding place, she sat down with them under their tree and watched them devour their food, laughing and quite gloating over their appetites. She was full of fun and made them laugh at all sorts of odd things. She told them stories in broad Yorkshire and taught them new words. She laughed as if she could not help it when they told her of the increasing difficulty there was in pretending that Colin was still a fretful invalid. "You see, we can't help laughing nearly all the time when we are together," explained Colin, "and it doesn't sound ill at all. We try to choke it back, but it will burst out and the sound's worse than ever. There's one thing that comes into my mind so often," said Mary, "and I can scarcely ever hold it in when I think of it suddenly. I keep thinking, suppose Colin's face should get to look like a full moon. It isn't like one yet, but he gets a tiny bit fatter every day, and suppose some morning it should look like one. What should we do?" "Bless us all, I can see there has a good bit of play acting to do," said Susan Sorby, "but they won't have to keep it up much longer. Mr. Craven'll come home." "Do you think he will?" asked Colin. "Why?" Susan Sorby chuckled softly. "I suppose it'd nigh break thy heart if he found out before they told him in the home way," he said. "There's laid awake nights planning it." "I couldn't bear anyone else to tell him," said Colin. "I think about different ways every day. I think now I just want to run into his room." "That'd be a fine start for him," said Susan Sorby. "I'd like to see his face, lad. I would that. He mun come back, that he mun." One of the things they talked of was the visit they were to make to her cottage. They planned it all. They were to drive over the moor and lunch out of doors among the heather. They would see all the 12 children and Dickon's garden, and would not come back until they were tired. Susan Sorby got up at last to return to the house, and Mrs. Medlock. It was time for Colin to be wheeled back also. But before he got into his chair, he stood quite close to Susan, and fixed his eyes on her with a kind of bewildered adoration, and he suddenly caught hold of the fold of her blue cloak and held it fast. "You are just what I wanted," he said. "I wish you were my mother as well as Dickon's." All at once Susan Sorby bent down and drew him with her warm arms close against the bosom under the blue cloak, as if he had been Dickon's brother. The quick mist swept over her eyes. "Eh, dear lad," she said, "thy own mother's in this here garden, I do believe. She couldna keep out of it. Thy father mun come back to thee, he mun." Chapter 27. In the Garden. In each century since the beginning of the world, wonderful things have been discovered. In the last century, more amazing things were found out than in any century before. In this new century, hundreds of things still more astounding will be brought to light. At first, people refuse to believe that a strange new thing can be done. Then they begin to hope it can be done. Then they see it can be done. Then it is done, and all the world wonders why it was not done centuries ago. One of the new things people began to find out in the last century was that thoughts, just mere thoughts, are as powerful as electric batteries, as good for one as sunlight is, or as bad for one as poison. To let a sad thought or a bad one get into your mind is as dangerous as letting a scarlet fever germ get into your body. If you let it stay there after it has got into, you may never get over it as long as you live. So long as Mistress Mary's mind was full of disagreeable thoughts about her dislikes and sour opinions of people, and her determination not to be pleased by or interested in anything, she was a yellow-faced, sickly, bored and wretched child. Circumstances, however, were very kind to her, though she was not at all aware of it. They began to push her about for her own good. When her mind gradually filled itself with robins and moorland cottages crowded with children, with queer crabbed old gardeners and common little Yorkshire housemaids, with springtime and with secret gardens coming alive day by day, and also with a moor-boy and his creatures, there was no room left for the disagreeable thoughts which affected her liver and her digestion and made her yellow and tired. So long as Colin shut himself up in his room and thought only of his fears and weakness, and his detestation of people who looked at him, and reflected hourly on humps and early death, he was a hysterical, half-crazy little hypochondriac who knew nothing of the sunshine and the spring, and also did not know that he could get well, and could stand upon his feet if he tried to do it. When new beautiful thoughts began to push out the old hideous ones, life began to come back to him. His blood ran healthily through his veins, and strength poured into him like a flood. His scientific experiment was quite practical and simple, and there was nothing weird about it at all. Much more surprising things can happen to anyone who, when a disagreeable or discouraged thought comes into his mind, just has the sense to remember in time and push it out by putting in an agreeable, determinedly courageous one. Two things cannot be in one place. Where you tend a rose, my lad, a thistle cannot grow. It's quite good, actually, that. While the secret garden was coming alive and two children were coming alive with it, there was a man wandering about certain faraway beautiful places in the Norwegian fjords and the valleys and mountains of Switzerland, and he was a man who, for 10 years, had kept his mind filled with dark and heartbroken thinking. He had not been courageous. He had never tried to put any other thoughts in the place of the dark ones. He had wandered by blue lakes and thought them. He had lain on mountainsides with sheets of deep blue gentians blooming all about him, and flower breaths filling all the air, and he had thought them. A terrible sorrow had fallen upon him when he had been happy, and he had let his soul fill itself with blackness, and had refused obstinately to allow any rift of light to pierce through. He had forgotten and deserted his home and his duties. When he travelled about, darkness so brooded over him that the sight of him was a wrong done to other people, because it was as if he poisoned the air about him with gloom. Most strangers thought he must be either half-mad or a man with some hidden crime on his soul. He was a tall man with a drawn face and crooked shoulders, and the name he always entered on hotel registers was Archibald Craven, Misselthwaite Manor, Yorkshire, England. Well, that brings a certain difference. I was not expecting it to be Archibald Craven just then, but anyway. That is the end of the reading. We do not have a time to do another page, I'm afraid. So, with that all said, we do come to the end of the episode as well, quite nicely now, after a little bit of stalling. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.